Ethan was not like other kids in his small town. While most teenagers spent their days glued to screens or hanging out at the mall, Ethan could be found in the corner of a quiet dojo, perfecting his kicks and punches. From the age of 6, he had been training under Master Lee, an elderly martial artist with a sharp eye and even sharper tongue. The dojo walls were lined with trophies and medals, most of them won by Ethan over the years, but they weren't just for show. Each one told a story of sweat, sacrifice, and countless hours spent mastering techniques that seemed impossible at first. Master Lee always said, martial arts is not about fighting. It's about discipline, respect, and knowing when not to fight. But Ethan didn't always listen. As he grew older, his confidence soared along with his skills. By 18, he had earned his black belt and become something of a local legend. His name echoed through gyms and arenas where competitors whispered about the unstoppable. It wasn't just his speed or strength that set him apart, it was his precision. Every punch landed exactly where it needed to. Every kick carried both power and grace. He moved like water, flowing effortlessly around opponents who struggled to keep up. But fame came with its own challenges. People started expecting perfection from him all the time. At tournaments, crowds would cheer wildly whenever he stepped onto the mat, but behind their applause lay whispers of doubt. Could he really live up to his reputation? Would there ever come a day when someone finally beat him? These questions gnawed at Ethan, pushing him to train harder than ever before. Some nights, after everyone else had gone home, he'd stay late in the dojo practicing combinations until his muscles burned and his knuckles bled. Winning wasn't just important to him anymore, it felt necessary. One evening, as Ethan sparred with another student, Master Lee watched silently from the sidelines. When the session ended, he called Ethan aside. "You've become very good," the old man began, his voice calm yet firm. "But remember this, no matter how strong you are, there will always be forces beyond your control. True strength comes not from overpowering others, but from understanding yourself." Ethan nodded politely, though deep down he wasn't convinced. To him, strength meant being unbeatable. How could anything, or anyone, stand in his way now? As months passed, Ethan's victories piled up, each one feeding his growing sense of invincibility. Friends admired him, rivals feared him, and strangers looked at him with awe. Yet beneath the surface, a seed of arrogance had taken root. For all his skill and determination, Ethan still had much to learn about life outside the dojo. And soon, the world would teach him lessons no amount of training could prepare him for. After years of dominating tournaments and earning accolades, Ethan decided it was time for a change. He had saved enough money from prize winnings and part-time jobs to take a gap year before starting college. With a backpack slung over his shoulder and a thirst for adventure, he set off to explore the world. His first stop, a faraway kingdom known for its rich history, towering castles, and grand celebrations honoring its royal family. The moment Ethan stepped into the bustling capital city, he felt like he'd been transported to another era. Cobblestone streets wound through vibrant markets, filled with colorful fabrics, handcrafted jewelry, and the aroma of spices wafting from food stalls. Street performers juggled fire and played soulful melodies on stringed instruments, while locals dressed in traditional attire laughed and bartered with vendors. It was nothing like the quiet suburban town where Ethan had grown up, and he couldn't help but feel a sense of wonder at every turn. One afternoon, Ethan found himself drawn to a large square packed with people. A festival was underway, celebrating the monarchy's contributions to the kingdom's prosperity. Banners bearing the royal crest fluttered in the breeze, and musicians played lively tunes as dancers moved gracefully in front of a raised platform. On the platform stood members of the royal family, waving regally to the crowd. Among them was the king, a tall man with piercing eyes and an air of authority that commanded respect. As Ethan watched, something caught his attention near the edge of the square. A street vendor, an elderly woman selling handmade crafts, was being confronted by a royal guard. The guard's armor gleamed under the sun as he barked orders at her, gesturing angrily toward her stall. Ethan strained to hear what was happening, but the noise of the crowd made it difficult. From what he could gather, the guard accused the woman of setting up her stall too close to the royal procession route, a minor infraction, yet one the guard seemed determined to enforce harshly. Ethan's stomach tightened as he saw the guard grab the woman's arm roughly, yanking her away from her goods. Her face crumpled in fear and pain, and several items fell to the ground, shattering upon impact. Murmurs rippled through the nearby spectators, but no one dared intervene. After all, crossing a royal guard was not something taken lightly in this kingdom. Anyone who challenged their authority risked severe consequences. But Ethan wasn't like everyone else. His heart raced as anger bubbled inside him. He thought about Master Li's lessons, about restraint and knowing when not to fight. But those words faded quickly beneath the weight of what he was witnessing. To him, this wasn't just about rules. It was about right and wrong. Without fully thinking through the implications, Ethan pushed his way through the crowd, his fists clenched and his jaw set. "Hey!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the murmurs. The guard turned, startled, as Ethan stepped between him and the trembling vendor. "Leave her alone," Ethan said firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. For a brief moment, silence fell over the square. Eyes widened, heads turned, and whispers erupted among the onlookers. No one could believe what they were seeing, a foreigner standing up to a royal guard. The guard straightened, his expression darkening. "Do you know who I am?" he growled, his hand resting menacingly on the hilt of his sword. Ethan didn't flinch. Instead, he locked eyes with the guard, his years of martial arts training giving him an unshakable confidence. What happened next would change everything, for better or worse. The tension in the square was palpable as Ethan stood face to face with the royal guard, his heart pounding like a drum. The guard's hand hovered over the hilt of his sword, but Ethan didn't back down. Years of training had taught him to read people's movements, and he could see that the guard was more surprised than angry, at least for now. Still, there was no mistaking the danger in the air. This wasn't a sparring match or a tournament. This was real life, and the stakes were higher than ever. "Leave her alone," Ethan repeated, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The elderly vendor cowered behind him, clutching her shawl tightly around her shoulders. Her eyes darted between Ethan and the guard, filled with both fear and gratitude. Around them, the crowd held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The guard sneered, taking a step closer. "You don't belong here, boy," he spat. "This isn't your kingdom, and these aren't your laws. Step aside before you regret it." Ethan hesitated for a split second. He knew the guard was right. This wasn't his fight. But something inside him refused to walk away. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was anger, or maybe it was just the belief that standing up for what was right mattered more than anything else. Whatever it was, it propelled him forward. Before the guard could react, Ethan moved. In one fluid motion, he swept his leg low, catching the guard off balance. The man stumbled backward, arms flailing as he tried to regain his footing. Without missing a beat, Ethan followed up with a swift kick aimed squarely at the guard's jaw. The sound of impact echoed through the square, sharp and unmistakable. The guard collapsed onto the ground, his helmet clattering loudly against the cobblestones. For a moment, everything froze. The crowd stared in stunned silence, unable to process what they'd just witnessed. Even Ethan felt a jolt of disbelief as he looked down at the fallen guard. He hadn't meant to hurt him, just stop him. But the sheer force of his actions hit him all at once. His chest rose and fell rapidly as reality began to sink in. Then chaos erupted. Shouts rang out from every direction as other guards rushed toward the scene, their armor glinting menacingly in the sunlight. Spectators scrambled out of the way, some gasping in shock, while others whispered warnings to Ethan about the gravity of what he'd done. Assaulting a royal guard wasn't just frowned upon. It was considered an act of treason in this kingdom. Ethan raised his hands instinctively, trying to show he wasn't looking for further trouble. "Wait," he called out, his voice strained. "I didn't mean." But the guards weren't listening. They surrounded him in seconds, weapons drawn and expressions grim. One of them grabbed Ethan roughly by the arm, twisting it behind his back until he winced in pain. Another confiscated his backpack, rifling through its contents as if searching for evidence of some greater crime. Ethan glanced around desperately, hoping someone, anyone, would speak up in his defense. But the crowd remained silent, their earlier awe replaced by unease. As the guards dragged him away, Ethan caught one last glimpse of the elderly vendor. She stood frozen in place, tears streaming down her weathered face. Whether they were tears of relief or fear, Ethan couldn't tell. All he knew was that he had acted on instinct, without thinking about the consequences. Now those consequences were closing in around him like a vice. The journey to the palace dungeons felt surreal. Ethan's mind raced as he replayed the events over and over again, wondering how things had escalated so quickly. Had he made a terrible mistake? Or had he done the right thing, even if it cost him dearly? As the heavy iron doors slammed shut behind him, sealing him in darkness, Ethan realized one thing for certain. His martial arts training might have prepared him for physical battles, but nothing could have prepared him for what came next. The palace dungeons were unlike anything Ethan had ever experienced. The air was damp and heavy, carrying the faint smell of mold and rusted metal. Flickering torchlight cast eerie shadows on the cold stone walls, while the distant drip of water echoed endlessly in the silence. His cell was small, barely large enough to stretch out in, with a thin straw mat serving as his only comfort. Shackles hung from the wall, though they hadn't been used on him yet. For hours, Ethan sat cross-legged on the mat, replaying the events over and over in his mind. He thought about the street vendor, her trembling hands and tear-streaked face. Had he truly helped her, or had his actions only made things worse? And then there was the guard, the man whose jaw he'd kicked so forcefully. Was it self-defense, or was it arrogance masked as heroism? Each question gnawed at him, leaving him more restless than before. As time dragged on, Ethan began to realize just how serious his situation was. A guard had explained earlier that assaulting a member of the royal guard wasn't merely a misdemeanor. It was seen as an act of defiance against the crown itself. In this kingdom, such offenses carried severe penalties, fines that would bankrupt most families, public humiliation, exile, or even imprisonment for life. Some whispered tales of harsher punishments reserved for foreigners who dared challenge the king's authority. Ethan shuddered at the thought. For all his confidence outside the dojo, here in the darkness of the dungeon, he felt utterly powerless. No amount of martial arts training could prepare him for this. There were no rules to follow, no referees to call foul, and no judges to declare a winner. This wasn't a fight he could win with strength alone. It required something else entirely: patience, strategy, and perhaps humility. Word of Ethan's arrest spread quickly through the kingdom, reaching the ears of the king himself. Known as a fair but stern ruler, King Alden prided himself on maintaining order within his realm. Yet when news of the foreigner reached him, he found himself intrigued rather than outraged. Assaulting a guard was no small matter, but the fact that this young man had acted in defense of a common citizen added complexity to the case. It wasn't every day someone risked their freedom, and possibly their life, for someone else. Curious, the king summoned Captain Rylan, the head of the royal guard, to discuss the matter further. "Tell me everything you know about this boy," King Alden said, leaning back in his ornate chair. His sharp eyes studied the captain intently, searching for any hint of bias or exaggeration. Captain Rylan hesitated before speaking. "He claims to be a traveler, Your Majesty. From what we've gathered, he has skills, impressive ones. Perhaps too impressive." The captain recounted the details of the incident, emphasizing how swiftly Ethan had disarmed and incapacitated the guard. "Some of the men are calling him dangerous, but others admit they've never seen moves like his." King Alden stroked his beard thoughtfully. "Dangerous or not, He seems to have stirred quite a reaction among my people. I want to meet him myself." With that, the king dismissed the captain, already formulating plans in his mind. Whatever punishment awaited Ethan, the king wanted to ensure justice was served, not just for the sake of the law, but for the reputation of the monarchy. Back in the dungeon, Ethan tried to distract himself by focusing on his breathing, a technique Master Li had taught him years ago. But even that offered little solace. His thoughts kept drifting to his family and friends back home, wondering if they'd heard about his predicament. Would anyone come looking for him? Or would he simply disappear into this foreign land, forgotten by everyone except those who saw him as a troublemaker? Despite the bleakness of his surroundings, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this ordeal wasn't over yet. Something, or someone, was bound to intervene. Whether it led to salvation or deeper trouble remained to be seen. All he knew was that the choices he made next would define not just his fate, but also the kind of person he wanted to become. Late one evening, when the dungeon was cloaked in near-total darkness, Ethan heard soft footsteps approaching his cell. At first, he thought it was another guard coming to deliver stale bread or a jug of water, his only sustenance since his imprisonment. But as the figure drew closer, holding a lantern that cast flickering light across the stone walls, Ethan realized this visitor was different. It was a young woman, her face partially hidden beneath a hooded cloak. She carried herself with quiet confidence, her movements deliberate yet graceful. When she stepped into the dim glow of the lantern, Ethan's breath caught. Her features were striking: sharp cheekbones, piercing green eyes, and a regal bearing that made her seem almost otherworldly. Before he could say anything, she raised a finger to her lips, signaling for silence. "I've heard about you," she whispered, her voice low but steady. "The foreigner who dared stand up to one of our guards." She studied him intently, as if trying to see beyond his disheveled appearance and weary expression. "You're either very brave or very foolish." Ethan blinked, unsure how to respond. Was she mocking him, or genuinely curious? Finally, he managed to speak. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," he said cautiously. I saw something wrong and acted without thinking." The woman tilted her head slightly, considering his words. Then, much to Ethan's surprise, she smiled, a small, amused smile that softened her otherwise stern demeanor. "That's what makes you interesting," she replied. Most people would have stayed silent. Before Ethan could ask who she was or why she had come, she introduced herself. "My name is Amara. I'm the king's youngest daughter." Ethan's eyes widened in shock. A princess, visiting him in the dungeons. This was the last thing he'd expected. Amara explained that she had overheard her father discussing Ethan's case and became intrigued by the story. Unlike many members of the royal family, Amara had always been fascinated by the lives of ordinary citizens, their struggles, their resilience, and their untold stories. To her, Ethan represented something rare, someone willing to risk everything for a stranger, even in a land where such actions often led to dire consequences. But Amara wasn't there out of mere curiosity. She had an offer, one that came with conditions. "If I speak on your behalf, my father might show leniency," she began, her tone turning serious. "However, I need something from you in return." Ethan leaned forward, his heart racing. "Anything," he said quickly, his voice tinged with desperation. "Just tell me what you want." Amara hesitated for a moment, then revealed her request. "Teach me self-defense," she said firmly. "Not because I fear for my safety, but because I believe knowledge like yours can empower others. Too many people in this kingdom feel powerless, especially women. If I learn, I can pass those skills along to those who need them most." Ethan stared at her, stunned. Never in his wildest dreams had he imagined teaching martial arts to a princess, and yet the idea sparked something inside him. A glimmer of hope, perhaps, or a chance to redeem himself. Still, he couldn't ignore the weight of her proposal. Teaching Amara wouldn't just be about physical techniques. It would require trust, patience, and respect for her culture and traditions. "There's one condition," Amara added, breaking into his thoughts. "You must swear loyalty to our customs while you're here. No more reckless acts, no more challenging authority. Do we have a deal?" Ethan hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Deal," he said, his voice resolute. As Amara extended her hand to seal the agreement, Ethan felt a strange mix of relief and determination wash over him. For the first time since his arrest, he saw a path forward, not just out of the dungeon, but toward proving that his actions, however misguided, had stemmed from a desire to do good. As Amara turned to leave, her lantern casting long shadows behind her, Ethan called after her softly. "Thank you," he said, his voice sincere. Amara paused, glanced back, and gave him a faint smile before disappearing into the darkness. For the rest of the night, Ethan lay awake, replaying their conversation in his mind. He knew this was only the beginning of a long journey, but for the first time in days, he felt a spark of hope. The next morning, Ethan was escorted out of the dungeon, not to face punishment, but to begin his new role as Princess Amara's instructor. Word of their arrangement had spread quickly through the palace, and while some servants whispered disapprovingly about a foreign criminal being allowed such proximity to royalty, others were curious. After all, it wasn't every day that a princess took an interest in learning martial arts. Training sessions were held in a secluded courtyard surrounded by high stone walls adorned with ivy. The space was simple yet functional, with enough room for movement and practice. Amara arrived each day dressed in practical clothing, loose trousers, and a tunic that allowed her to move freely. Though she carried herself with grace, Ethan could tell she had little experience with physical combat. Her movements were hesitant at first, unsure and awkward, but there was something else beneath the surface: determination. Ethan started with the basics: stances, footwork, and breathing techniques. He explained how balance was key, not just physically but mentally. "Martial arts isn't about brute force," he said during one session, echoing Master Lee's words. "It's about control, knowing when to act and when to hold back." Amara listened intently, absorbing every word. She didn't complain when drills left her muscles sore or when sweat dripped down her face after hours of practice. Instead, she pushed herself harder, determined to improve. Over time, Ethan noticed subtle changes in her posture and confidence. What had once been clumsy punches became precise strikes. Wobbly kicks transformed into fluid motions. Watching her progress filled him with a sense of pride he hadn't felt since his early days in the dojo. But teaching Amara wasn't just about physical training. It was also a lesson in humility for Ethan. Through their conversations, he began to understand the kingdom's culture and values in ways he never had before. Amara shared stories about her family, her people, and the responsibilities that came with being part of the royal lineage. She spoke passionately about justice, fairness, and the delicate balance required to rule wisely. One afternoon, as they took a break under the shade of a tree, Amara turned to Ethan with a thoughtful expression. "You know," she said, "when I first heard about what you did, I thought you were reckless. But now, I think maybe you acted out of instinct. Not everyone would risk so much for someone they didn't even know." Ethan looked down, embarrassed by her kind words. "I still messed up," he admitted. "I let my emotions get the better of me. That's not what my master taught me." Amara nodded. "We all make mistakes. The important thing is what we do afterward. You're making amends, not just by teaching me, but by showing respect for our ways. That takes courage, too." As weeks passed, Ethan's presence in the palace became less controversial. Guards who had once glared at him with suspicion began nodding in acknowledgement, impressed by his dedication and discipline. Even Captain Ryland softened slightly, though he remained wary. "You're lucky the princess trusts you," he said gruffly one day after observing a training session. "Don't give her reason to doubt you." Ethan promised he wouldn't. Each day, he worked harder, not just to teach Amara, but to prove himself worthy of the second chance he'd been given. Teaching her forced him to reflect on his own journey, reminding him of the lessons he'd forgotten along the way. He realized that true strength wasn't about overpowering others. It was about lifting them up, helping them find their own power. By the time autumn leaves began falling in the courtyard, Amara had made remarkable progress. She moved with purpose now, her strikes sharp and deliberate. More importantly, she carried herself differently, with quiet confidence and a newfound belief in her abilities. But Ethan knew their work together was about more than self-defense. It was about bridging two worlds, finding common ground, and proving that redemption was always possible if you were willing to fight for it. Just as Ethan and Amara began to settle into a rhythm with their training, an unexpected storm brewed in the kingdom. Whispers of unrest had been circulating for weeks, rumors of rebellious factions growing bolder, dissatisfied with the monarchy's rule. Some claimed the rebels sought justice for the poor and oppressed. Others said they wanted power for themselves. Whatever their motives, one thing was clear: trouble was coming. The rebellion erupted suddenly, catching everyone off guard. One evening, as Ethan and Amara practiced in the courtyard, distant shouts and the clash of steel echoed through the air. Servants ran past, panic etched on their faces, while guards scrambled to secure the palace gates. Within moments, Captain Rylan appeared, his expression grim. "Your Highness," he said urgently, addressing Amara, "the rebels are attacking the outer walls. You must retreat to the safe chambers immediately." Amara hesitated, glancing at Ethan. "What about him?" she asked, pointing to her instructor. "He stays here," Rylan replied firmly. "It's too dangerous to move him now." Before Ethan could protest, Amara stepped forward, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "If he's staying, then so am I. He's taught me how to defend myself. I won't hide while others fight." Rylan opened his mouth to argue, but a loud explosion nearby silenced him. The sound shook the ground beneath their feet, sending dust cascading from the walls. With no time to waste, the captain nodded reluctantly and ordered 2 guards to accompany them. As they moved through the palace corridors, Ethan stayed close to Amara, his senses on high alert. This wasn't a dojo or a tournament. Real lives were at stake, and failure meant death. His mind raced, recalling every technique he ever learned. But more than anything, he focused on protecting Amara. Not just because she was royalty, but because she had become someone who mattered to him. The group reached the main hall, where chaos reigned. Rebels armed with crude weapons clashed with royal guards, their battle cries filling the air. Amid the confusion, Ethan spotted a rebel leader shouting orders, his gaze locked onto Amara. Without hesitation, Ethan positioned himself between her and the advancing threat. "Stay behind me," he whispered to Amara, his voice calm but firm. The rebel lunged forward, swinging a heavy club. Ethan sidestepped quickly, using the man's momentum against him. A swift kick sent the weapon clattering to the floor, followed by a precise strike that knocked the rebel unconscious. More attackers surged toward them, but Ethan held his ground, moving with precision and purpose. Each movement was calculated, not to harm unnecessarily, but to neutralize threats and create space for Amara to escape if needed. Amara, however, refused to cower. Drawing on everything Ethan had taught her, she joined the fray, delivering well-placed strikes and kicks that stunned their opponents. Together, they formed an unlikely team, fighting side by side in the heart of the palace. When reinforcements finally arrived, led by King Alden himself, the tide turned. The rebels retreated, leaving behind a trail of destruction. As the dust settled, Ethan found himself kneeling beside Amara, both of them breathless and battered but alive. King Alden approached, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. For a moment, Ethan feared the worst, that his actions would cost him dearly once again. But instead, the king placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've proven your loyalty today," Alden said gruffly. "Not just to my daughter, but to this kingdom. That is something I cannot ignore." Though the immediate danger had passed, Ethan knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Yet, as he looked at Amara, standing tall despite everything, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about survival, it was about standing up for what was right, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. In the days following the rebellion, the kingdom began to heal. The rebels had been driven back, their leaders captured or scattered, and life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. For Ethan, however, the aftermath brought mixed emotions. He had earned the king's gratitude, and with it, his freedom. But the weight of everything he'd experienced lingered heavily on his mind. King Alden summoned Ethan to the throne room one morning, where Amara stood beside him, her expression unreadably calm. The king wasted no time getting to the point. "You've proven yourself in ways I didn't expect," he said, his deep voice echoing through the vast chamber. "For that, you are pardoned. You may leave this kingdom whenever you wish." Ethan bowed his head respectfully, though relief flooded through him. Freedom was within reach, but as he glanced at Amara, he realized leaving wouldn't be as simple as walking out the gates. She had become more than just a student. She was a friend who had shown him kindness, trust, and understanding when he needed it most. Before Ethan could respond, Amara stepped forward. "Father," she began, her tone measured but firm, "I believe Ethan deserves more than just his freedom. His actions have helped protect our family and our people. If he chooses to stay, I think we should welcome him, not as a prisoner, but as an ally." The king studied his daughter for a long moment before turning to Ethan. "What do you want?" he asked, his sharp eyes piercing. Ethan hesitated. Staying would mean continuing to teach Amara, perhaps even playing a role in shaping the future of this kingdom. But deep down, he knew his journey wasn't meant to end here. This place had taught him invaluable lessons about humility, loyalty, and the complexities of life beyond the dojo. But it wasn't home. "I'm grateful for your mercy, your majesty," Ethan replied, choosing his words carefully. "But my path lies elsewhere. There's still so much I need to learn, and so much I want to share with others." Amara nodded, though there was a flicker of sadness in her eyes. "I understand," she said softly, "and I'll always remember what you've taught me, not just about fighting, but about standing up for what's right." On the day of his departure, Amara accompanied Ethan to the palace gates. In her hands, she held a small bundle wrapped in silk. "This is for you," she said, handing it to him. Inside was a ceremonial dagger, its hilt adorned with intricate carvings, and a single phrase engraved along the blade: "Strength without wisdom is fleeting." Ethan stared at the gift, touched by its significance. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a reminder of everything he'd learned during his time in the kingdom. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I won't forget any of this, or you." Amara smiled faintly. "Stay safe, Ethan. And don't stop being the person you are now, the one who fights not just with skill, but with heart." As Ethan walked away from the palace, the dagger tucked safely into his belt, he felt lighter than he had in months. The road ahead stretched endlessly before him, winding through forests, mountains, and unknown towns. He didn't know where it would lead, but for the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid of uncertainty. With each step, Ethan carried not just the physical reminders of his journey, the dagger, the lessons, but also an unshakable belief in the power of growth. He wasn't the same arrogant young man who had once kicked a royal guard in the face. That moment had set off a chain of events that tested him in ways he never imagined, forcing him to confront his flaws and redefine what true strength meant. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the landscape, Ethan paused to look back one last time. The palace loomed majestically in the distance, its spires silhouetted against the sky. Somewhere inside those walls, Amara was carrying on the work they had started together, empowering others, bridging divides, and proving that even the smallest acts of courage could spark change. Turning back toward the open road, Ethan took a deep breath and smiled. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he was ready. After all, Life wasn't about avoiding mistakes. It was about learning from them, growing stronger, and becoming someone better. And for the first time, Ethan truly believed he was on the right path.